Coming up on Arirang News. Keeping peace through strength is what President Yoon Suk Yeol is calling for from his military. This during the New Year's policy briefing from the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Defense. The Defense Ministry plans more combined exercises with the U.S. to counter nuclear threats from Pyongyang. South Korea defends its new restrictions on travel from China, saying they are unavoidable as a means to protect the Korean people. On top of short-term visa suspensions, Beijing comes up with another retaliatory measure, suspending the exemption for Korean nationals from the need for transit visas. South Korea saw robust job growth last year, recording the largest on-year additions seen in more than 2 decades. This comes as the country's economy recovers to the state before the pandemic. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in South Korea, and thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We begin at the nation's top office. Peace through strength is what President Yoon Suk Yeol has highlighted to his military. He's also called closer security cooperation with the nation's key ally. Our top office bureau chief, Moon Gun-young, has our top story.
Any attack on South Korea should be met with overwhelming response. President Yoon Suk Yeol to his defense chief during this year's Foreign Affairs and Defense Ministry's New Year policy briefing on Wednesday.
The president said as we are a peace-loving nation, South Korea would never initiate a war of invasion. However, we must also be fully prepared to defend ourselves with utmost strength against any provocations that threaten our freedom and peace. In that sense, military training and exercises must be considered and carried out as if they are key operations themselves.
This is based on the South Korean commander-in-chief's strong belief that peace that relies on the other side's good intentions is neither sustainable nor genuine. Seoul's top office said President Yoon also instructed his military to boost cooperation with the U.S. in all parts of the extended deterrence and strengthen Seoul's three-axis defense system in order to more effectively deter North Korea's growing threats. Now, this is in line with his interview with the Associated Press published earlier in the day, where Mr. Yoon reiterated his call for closer security cooperation with the U.S. and Japan to counter the, quote, dangerous situation being created by North Korea, as he played down the prospect for direct negotiations like those pursued by his liberal predecessor. When asked to clarify his recent remarks regarding discussions with the U.S. on joint exercises potentially involving U.S. nuclear assets, the South Korean leader said the proposed plans include tabletop exercises, computer simulations, and drills on delivery means for nuclear weapons, as both countries are exposed to the North Korean nuclear threat. Some in the academia say this president likely wants to stress efforts to boost the viability of its ally of 70 years U.S. security commitment to protect Seoul from Pyongyang. The South Korea-U.S. security alliance was formed in October of 1953 with the signing of the Mutual Defense Treaty and has so far demonstrated success by both its longevity and its ability to maintain peace on the Korean peninsula. Marking 70 years of alliance this year, the South Korean government says Yoon's visit to the U.S. is in the works. Moon Gun-young, Arirang News.
Staying with national defense and foreign policy briefings, South Korea's defense ministry unveiled today its plan with timeline to hold more combined exercises with the U.S. to counter nuclear threats from North Korea. As for the foreign ministry, it vows to keep its current stance on China after Beijing stops issuing short-term visas to Koreans. Bae Eun-ji reports.
South Korea and the U.S. plan to carry out their combined military exercise next month under the scenario of North Korea using its nuclear weapons. Then in May, Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff will be holding a separate tabletop exercise with the U.S. military. The defense minister announced this in a briefing on Wednesday, following the ministry's report to President Yoon Suk Yeol on major policy tasks for this year. The allies will also be holding an 11-day combined drill in the first half of this year, making it the longest joint drill between the two countries, conducted without a break. Highlighting the importance of strengthening the military's capability to counter North Korea's missile threats, the defense minister also said South Korea plans to launch its first military reconnaissance satellite this year.
To significantly increase the capability of the country's intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance assets, we will be launching our first military reconnaissance satellite this year. So our military will be independently operating its very own spy satellite.
The Foreign Ministry also reported to President Yoon on its task for this year on Wednesday, where it vowed to work with partners to achieve peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. President Yoon was also briefed on China's suspension of short-term visa issuance for South Koreans after Seoul strengthened COVID-19 measures for those entering from China. Yoon ordered the Foreign Ministry to thoroughly explain Seoul's stance to Beijing, as those stricter measures are based on scientific and objective reasoning to protect South Korean citizens.
We don't want these measures to negatively impact our diplomatic relations with China, so our stance remains that these quarantine measures that we've taken are based on scientific and objective reasoning.
On North Korea, the foreign minister said it aims to continue to work toward denuclearization on the Korean peninsula with the international community, based on the Yoon administration's audacious initiative approach towards Pyongyang. 배은지, Arirang News.
South Korea says the decision to impose restrictions on travel from China was unavoidable. Today, Beijing comes up with additional restrictions to stop transit visa exemptions for Korean nationals on the heels of its retaliatory short-term visa suspensions. Song Yoo-jin has the details.
South Korea says it had no choice but to impose travel restrictions on China.
President Yoon Suk Yeol says the decision to suspend the issuance of short-term visas for Chinese nationals was solely to protect those here in the country. He has asked the Foreign Ministry to explain our position to China and said there is no reason for this to cause discomfort in our two countries' relations.
We prioritize the health and safety of people in South Korea. We're aware that the virus situation in China is getting worse, so we had to consider the possibility of a new virus wave or variant originating from China. We had to make this decision because we're one of the countries geographically closest to China.
On the same day, Beijing announced that it is also going to require transit visas for South Koreans passing through China on the way to other countries, something they'd previously been exempt from. This means transit visas will be needed for travelers staying through a Chinese airport for longer than 24 hours. A day earlier, Beijing announced that it was suspending the issuance of short-term visas for South Koreans, citing what it called Seoul's discriminatory entry restrictions against China. But the South Korean health authorities will decide whether to extend these travel rules after closely monitoring the virus situation both domestically and overseas. Currently, the testing requirements are set to remain until February and the suspension of short-term visa issuance for Chinese nationals until the end of January. Meanwhile, out of more than 5,600 travelers from China who received PCR tests upon arrival last week, almost 1 in 5 tested positive. The good news is that this rate has significantly dropped. It was over 30% early last week, but has fallen more than 10 percentage points after travelers were required to show a negative COVID-19 test result before departure starting last Thursday. And South Korea's overall number of COVID cases is also showing signs of declining. The daily number of infections last week averaged around 59,000, down almost 10% from the week before. The virus reproduction rate fell below 1 for the first time in 12 weeks, meaning each infected person is transmitting the virus to less than one other person. But the numbers of deaths and patients in critical condition are still high. The average number of deaths last week was 57 per day, while that of severely ill patients was almost 600. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea has recorded a trade deficit in the first 10 days of January after a drop in exports. Preliminary data from the Korea Customs Service today shows exports from January 1st to January 10th amounted to nearly $14 billion. Taking into account that there was one more working day this year compared to last year, daily average exports were down by around 14%. By item, semiconductors, the major driver of the country's exports, fell by nearly 30% on year. With the fall in exports, the country recorded a trade deficit of some $6.3 billion in the first 10 days of this year. The nation's employment last year saw the largest on-year increase in over 2 decades as the nation gets to recover from the impact of COVID restrictions. It could be a similar story for this year too, but there are concerns over an economic slowdown. Our Shin Ha-young with this report.
The number of people employed in South Korea last year rose by the most for any since 2000. Data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday shows that almost 28.1 million people were in employment in 2022, with an on-year increase of 816,000, which is almost 3 times the government's December estimate. That's slightly below the record figure from the year 2000, which saw the number of workers increase by some 882,000. While all age groups above 15 contributed to the growth, people aged 60 and over accounted for more than half of the total on-year gain, adding 452,000 jobs. For the same period, the employment rate among those aged 15 and above came to 62.1%, up 1.6 percentage points from the year before, recording an all-time high since 1963 when the data was first compiled. Last year's results came after South Korea's eased COVID-19 restrictions.
In 2022, an increase of activity due to a recovery in daily life, a rise in exports, as well as the demand for care services led to the overall job growth.
By industry, the healthcare sector added the most jobs, followed by manufacturing as well as restaurants and accommodation. On the other hand, those in wholesale and retail, as well as finance and insurance, saw an on-year decrease. Meanwhile, Statistics Korea forecasts 2023's employment rate to be similar to last year. However, it expected the job growth to slow down, citing a slower economy. The government's outlook is that the number of people employed will rise by 100,000 in 2023, while the Bank of Korea and the Korea Development Institute each forecast the number of people in work to increase by fewer than 100,000. In response, the government is planning to reform the labor market structure, including working hours and minimum wage. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Tackling labor market segmentation is key to President Yoon Suk Yeol's labor reform. Yoon made the remarks as he met with the current and former heads of the Presidential Council on Economy, Society and Labor over lunch on Wednesday. Labor market segmentation means that while some workers enjoy stable and secure careers with good development prospects, others face instability in employment, income uncertainty, and poor career prospects. Seoul's top office quoted Yoon as having said that such dual structure of the Korean labor market is, in fact, exploitation. This structural segmentation of Korea's labor market has long been cited as one of the primary factors behind the growing wage and benefit inequality between regular and non-regular employees. Higher prices are nothing new these days, but at the start of the year, soaring prices for daily necessities and food products at convenience stores are putting even more pressure on people's wallets. Our Lee Dae-yeon has this story.
South Korea is facing another wave of price rises at the start of 2023. Last year was mostly about processed food prices increasing, but now products ranging from daily necessities to fashion items have followed suit. Just a few purchases from convenience stores are becoming a huge burden for consumers. One major consumer goods company raised the prices of some of its products sold in convenience stores on the first day of this year. Powder laundry detergents are now up 18% to over $5. Dish soaps increased 15% to $3.70. Prices of shampoo and toothpaste jumped as high as 16%. A single can of Coca-Cola in a convenience store used to cost 1,900 won, or around $1.50. But in 2023, the price has now risen to $1.60, while another brand of cola, Pepsi, has seen its price increase by 16 cents. The price of canned coffee jumped 20% to 1,200 won, or almost $1. Processed food, too, has seen further price hikes.
I often go to a convenience store at my dorm. I used to buy ramyun for my meal, but now it costs almost 2,000 won, so it makes me hesitant about buying one.
I recently have thought it would be better to buy things in large supermarkets than convenience stores, after seeing the price rises there.
And amid the recent milkflation phenomena, prices of dairy products are soaring. One major coffee shop franchise said it's inevitable to raise prices by 200 won, or 16 cents, for all items that include milk. Adding to this, fashion and luxury brands are also upping prices. A classic shoe brand company based in the U.S. raised the prices of its popular products in Korea by 10%. Some luxury brands like Chanel and Rolex are also raising the prices of their best-selling items, including perfume and watches, by more than 6%. One expert says an increase in public utility charges may also further contribute to rising consumer prices.
Experts are predicting that the government will raise utility charges. If these charges go up, companies that use energy like gas and electricity to produce their products and services will also raise the prices of their products too.
However, he added that as consumer prices are relatively stable compared to a year earlier, inflation may ease in 2023, but consumer prices may remain high for a while. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Robots have slowly been incorporated into various sectors like healthcare or even cultural content. But they're evolving further with advanced artificial intelligence and virtual reality, which is bringing them closer to looking and behaving like humans. Yoon has the story.
This robot hears music and starts drumming to the beat. Compared to previous robots that could drum, this robot has joints similar to the human skeletal structure, which allows it to drum at a very high speed.
This robot uses artificial intelligence that can extract drum components from a song and can analyze a drum instrument part.
Next to a person moving their arms, the humanoid robot can replicate the movement. And it's not just the robot. A digital human in the metaverse can also make parallel movements. With special glasses, an image of a person is overlapped with the robot in an augmented reality platform. This is the first time that a person-like humanoid robot is linked to a digital human, which is then overlaid with a human image.
It's possible to have someone I know augmented by this humanoid, so that even if that person is not actually here, I can communicate in an indoor space, as if the person is right next to me.
Now this is a wearable robot that assists with walking. It is much lighter than physical therapy robots that are being used in hospitals. Weighing just under 3 kilograms, it allows the elderly to move around at home. As a wearable robot, it assists any weakened joints and muscles that are used for walking.
There is a small motor attached to the robot that creates energy similar to human muscles. This provides roughly 30% of the muscle strength required for walking.
A whole range of technology has helped robots evolve over the years. And now, not only are their movements becoming smoother and more human-like, but in some aspects, they already have more advanced motions. Yoon, Arirang News.
South Korea continues to have the second most powerful passport in the world, providing easy access to 192 countries. The global citizenship and residence advisory firm Henley & Partners released the ranking in its report for the first quarter of this year, which looks at which passports provide visa-free or visa-on-arrival access to the greatest number of countries. Japan led the way with easy entry to a record 193 countries, just one more than South Korea and Singapore. Germany and Spain were tied at third. Based on data from the International Air Transport Association, the firm says global travel is currently at 75% of levels seen before the pandemic. Over in Ukraine, there are conflicting claims regarding who has control over the eastern Ukrainian town of Soledar. Russia claims it has won control of the salt mining town, while Kyiv says its forces are holding out. Lee Si-hoo has the latest.
Russia's mercenary Wagner Group claims it gained control over the town of Soledar in eastern Ukraine on Wednesday, while Kyiv says its soldiers are holding out. Russian media reported a statement late on Tuesday purported to be by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of Wagner Group and an ally of Russian President Putin. The statement claimed that Wagner units took control of the entire territory of Soledar. However, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar has said that heavy fighting is continuing. While the claims by both sides have not been independently verified, the UK Ministry of Defense said that the town is likely to now be under the control of the Wagner Group. Control over the small salt mining town in the Donetsk region could help Russian troops take over the nearby strategic city of Bakhmut. Meanwhile, a U.S. Department of Defense official announced on Tuesday that Ukrainian soldiers will come to the U.S. for training on the Patriot missile system. The training, to begin as soon as next week and last several months, would prepare around 90 to 100 soldiers to effectively use the system when it's delivered. This comes weeks after the Pentagon said that it would send one Patriot air defense battery and associated munitions to Ukraine. The Pentagon said that Patriot will help the Ukrainians stand up to Russian aerial bombardment, which has increased in the past few months. On Tuesday, NATO and the EU agreed to strengthen their support for Ukraine. That's at the signing of the third joint declaration on NATO-European Union cooperation.
Russia's war against Ukraine has had two unintended consequences. It has strengthened both our organizations, the EU and NATO, and it has brought us closer together.
The two organizations vowed to take their partnership to the next level to address issues around the world. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
On Netflix, the South Korean original series The Glory was the streaming service's most watched non-English TV series in the world last week. According to Netflix, from January 2nd to the 8th, The Glory was watched around the world for a total of more than 82 million hours. Also, since its release 3 days earlier in late December, it recorded more than 25 million viewing hours, giving it a ranking of number 5 among shows on all major streaming services for those days, according to the website Flix Patrol. It also ranked in the top 10 in 62 countries, including South Korea, Canada, and Japan. Starring Song Ye-kyo, The Glory tells the story of a woman seeking vengeance for being bullied during high school. The second half of the 16-part series is scheduled to begin in March. A treasure from the Joseon dynasty, a lacquered case inlaid with mother of pearl, has been returned to South Korea from the United States. A group of supporters of the National Museum of Korea, the Young Friends of the Museum, revealed the case to the public on Wednesday after having purchased it at a recent auction in the U.S. It's assumed that the case was made in the 16th century based on the techniques used to make it, which include hammering to flatten the mother of pearl on the box's surface. It's 46 centimeters wide and 13 centimeters high, and it's decorated with designs of lotus flowers and their stems. It was possibly used by the upper class of that era to store valuables or stationery. According to the National Museum, there are only 4 16th century boxes of its kind left in the world.
Maximum temperatures will significantly exceed the seasonal average tomorrow. Expect conditions to be close to those of early spring, with most regions seeing highs of over 10 degrees. Seoul will see mild daytime temperatures of 13 degrees, while Jeju Island will be extremely warm at 20 degrees Celsius. However, keep in mind that mornings will stay quite cold, so dressing in layers will be recommended to keep your body temperatures warm. Clean air will be restored for parts of the south, but fine dust concentrations will continue to stay high for parts of central regions. Gyeonggi-do province and Daegu will see air quality standing in the bad category. The surrounding regions, including the capital area and Chungcheong-do province, will temporarily see high concentrations of fine dust. Sunny conditions will dominate nationwide. Seoul will be starting up at 0 degrees. Daily highs in Seoul will be jumping to 13 degrees, Gwangju 17, Busan will be warm at 16 degrees. For this weekend, the entire nation will see a mix of rain or snowfall. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That brings us to the end of today's newscast. Thank you for staying with us. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest news in South Korea and worldwide. Take care.
A reclusive country, a small country on the map of the world, the land of morning calm,